Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. This video continues on the story of John, which is by Cynthia Lennon, and we're now coming to the part of the book where John meets Yoko, and we're seeing it through the eyes of Cynthia, so let us see her views of what transpires. So John made a movie during this time. It was entitled How I Won the War. The film was successful, and he got good reviews. So John enjoyed acting, but he didn't like learning lines and waiting around on the set all the time. It was then that he decided to stick with music. And Cynthia didn't like that John was still doing drugs, and she felt like he was lost to her. So this is a part where John mentions Yoko. One morning, John was reading the paper at breakfast when he told her about an article in the paper about an artist named Yoko Ono. She had made a film that was about close-up shots of people's bottoms. And John said, "This can't be serious," and Cynthia shared a laugh about it. John said, "She must be off her rocker," and Cynthia agreed. They didn't understand avant-garde art or conceptualism, and they threw the newspaper away. And they didn't mention her again until one night when John and Cynthia were in bed reading, and Cynthia asked him what he was reading, and he said the book was Grapefruit, and it was by Yoko, the weird artist woman, as John described her. Cynthia then said she didn't know that they had met, and John said he went to her exhibition. I, myself, wonder why he didn't ask Cynthia to go with him. He said it was nutty. It wasn't unusual for him to get invitations to the art exhibition, so Cynthia didn't think anything about it. What Cynthia didn't know was that Yoko was after John. She wrote him a lot of letters and cards over the next few months. Yoko had also come over to the house looking for him, and Cynthia hadn't known about that either. The housekeeper, Dot, didn't think she was anything more than a fan, so she didn't bring it up. Well, Cynthia felt that her and John weren't close anymore. Cynthia had the feeling that things weren't how they were used to be, and she didn't feel much confidence in herself, which didn't help matters either. Cynthia felt like she had a strong Roman nose with a bump in the middle. She had her father's nose, and she felt that if she had her mother's small nose, then things would be different. She knew she was being silly, but she had to blame her feelings on something. So she ended up having cosmetic surgery, even though John said it was being ridiculous. So Cynthia never regretted the surgery once she saw her nose, and it was just what she wanted. But the funny thing was that nobody seemed to notice the difference. Julian didn't notice, and nor did her friends. John was fascinated by it, but said she was crazy to have done it. Well, John didn't change his ways. The Beatles were no longer touring, and he had been home for 9 months. The time together didn't change him. John was taking drugs daily and made him, according to Cynthia, unconnected, distant, moody, and unpredictable. It was up to Cynthia to take care of Julian in the house. When there was a launch party for Sergeant Pepper, a journalist named Ray Coleman saw John and was worried about his health. He could tell that John was drugged and that he was smoking and drinking heavily, and he looked old and ill. He had glazed eyes and his speech was slurred. The journalist mentioned it to Brian, the manager, and he said, "Don't worry, he's a survivor." Well, Cynthia said she was worried, too. The drugs ruined his appetite, and he looked terrible, and she was afraid he might kill himself. She felt he always had the potential to self-destruct. So Cynthia kept wondering why he was doing this, because she wondered if it blotted out the pain of his childhood. She thought his success should have taken care of that. But then she felt like the fame and the idolizing had become too much, and he turned to drugs to escape. So Cynthia felt like the feelings between them were getting further and further apart. She wanted a stable family life and a loving relationship with John, but he was restless. The Beatles weren't touring anymore, so he lost some of his direction. Cynthia did feel, even with the drug use, that John still loved her. He would put his arms around her and tell her so when he wasn't high. So the drugs continued to get in the way. And it was then that John got involved with the Maharishi. So George and Patty were the first to get involved with the Maharishi, and then George and Patty got John, Paul, Jane, and Ringo to go with them to a conference he was holding. So John was impressed. The Maharishi was anti-drugs, and he said through meditation you could reach a natural high as powerful as any drug. So John liked the idea of it, and Cynthia, of course, was happy that if it led him away from drugs. After the death of the Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, the Beatles looked to the Maharishi to give direction. So they all planned a trip to India. John was into the teaching of the Maharishi and was going to devote his life to meditation and spreading the word about it. Cynthia was skeptical, but she liked the message and the meditation. So during this time, John was off drugs and almost like himself again. He said he wanted to have more kids and told Cynthia that they could make things work. So now John and Cynthia encounter Yoko again. A few days before the group was to leave for India, they had a meeting with a Maharishi's assistant at a house in London to finalize the trip details. When they entered the room, in the corner armchair was Yoko. So Cynthia immediately thought, why was she there, and had John invited her? She sat there silent the whole time after introducing herself to the group. John talked to the Beatles and the others and acted like he didn't notice her. Cynthia and John's chauffeur opened the door of the car, and Yoko was the first to jump in. So John looked at Cynthia like he didn't know what was happening, and Yoko told where she wanted to get dropped off at. So Cynthia's intuition told her John had invited her, but he kept acting like he knew nothing about it. So Cynthia loved being in India, where there was no stresses and pressures of their normal life, no fans, no hordes of people, no flashing cameras. She said the first week there, they settled into meditating several hours a day, going to lectures, and the rest of the time they could do what they wanted. So Maureen and Ringo weren't that happy there. They missed their kids and the flies there they didn't like, and they got tired of eating food that they brought with them, and after 10 days they decided to leave. Ringo said the Maharishi was nice, but he wasn't for him. So Cynthia thought that she and John were going to have like a second honeymoon, but it didn't turn out that way. John was being cold and aloof, and he would leave their room early and didn't speak to her very much. And then, of all things, he requested a separate bedroom, and then he didn't see her in public or in private much. So John made an excuse that meditating was making him act this way. But what Cynthia didn't know was that John was going to the post office every morning to see if he had a letter from Yoko, and she was writing him daily, and Cynthia was hurt. She was trying to give John space with no idea that Yoko was taking him away from her. So after a month, Paul and Jane decided to leave India, and the only ones left were Cynthia and Patty, John, and George. And then the friend of theirs, Magic Alex, accused the Maharishi of behaving inappropriately with a young American girl. So John and George chose to believe Alex without speaking to the Maharishi first. John then told Cynthia that the Maharishi wasn't acting very spiritual. He wanted public recognition, celebrities, and money. So 8 weeks later, they all decided to go home. And once home, they loved being with Julian and catching up on the news with her mom and the housekeeper. But John and Cynthia still weren't what they once were. It was suggested by John that she join her friends for 2 weeks in Greece. Well, Cynthia wasn't sure about going on vacation without John, but she thought that absence might make the heart grow stronger, and she was soon to find out the real reason he suggested it. So I'll end the video here. If you enjoyed it, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be appreciated. And next, we're going to see the relationship get to the point of no return. So I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.